Hello and welcome to this week 3 video. In this video I want to talk a little bit about some things I'm thinking about after reading your week 2 assignments and walk you through some things to think about as a result of those week 2 assignments in your week 3 assignment revision. So first of all, I wanted to say that one of the things I was doing as I was reading your 2.3, creating a discussion board for presence and interaction assignments, was thinking about how there was something in my instructions that wasn't completely clear because almost half the class got to revise and resubmit. And when that happens, I generally know that there's something in the language from my instructions that isn't quite clear. So I was actually going in while I was grading and kind of modifying this instruction set on 2.3. So if you are one of the people who I did a revise and resubmit for, go back in and look at this assignment and see if there was somewhere in it that you were confused, because I really need that kind of feedback to continue to revise and adjust this. This is the second time I've given this particular assignment, and both times I've adjusted it kind of midstream, mid-course, and it's still not quite to where I need it to be. So any input on anything that might be confusing to you, especially in the light of the fact that we're working on creating clear instructions in the course, would be helpful. So that's kind of about the content of that assignment. I want to talk about how this assignment is going to help you get into the revision for your week 3 activity as well. So on this assignment, I asked you to kind of talk about what you thought the learning gaps would be in relation to discussion boards, and then asked you to write student-facing language that you would then ideally be able to take into week 3 for you to put into your assignment to do that revision. So all the activities in week 2 should actually be drafting activities to help you revise in week 3. The week 2.2 activity is the same thing. You should be able to use that kind of practice drafting chunk right back in your week 3 activity. So in talking about the week 3 revision, I want to talk a little bit about learner-centered assignment design. And you'll notice that I asked you first, before you go into the revision, actually to create a learner profile. Sorry, I'm scrolling back and forth. And that asks you to ask the same kinds of questions that Dirksen asks in Chapter 2 of Design for How People Learn. And that is, what do your learners want? Why are they in your class? What are their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations? What do your learners like? And how are your learners the same as you and different? And that will kind of give you some insight into how you can do the revisions this week to make them more effective for your students. And I'm going to give you an example from this class. So I have a range of learners in this class. I have people who are experienced online instructors. I have people who are new online instructors. I have people who have taught but never taught online. I have people who have never taught. And I have people who have done kind of tutoring or working in groups or working with writers, but haven't necessarily done that in the form of a class, and specifically not an online class. So that's a big range of people. So if I'm thinking about what do my learners want, they all want to learn effective methods for teaching, but some of them have already gotten kind of a core set of materials that they're working with. Some are developing all the materials from scratch on the fly as we go. And so I have to keep in mind that I don't want to necessarily bog down my more advanced learners with a lot of instructions, but I can't make it so esoteric that my new learners don't get enough to be able to even create a basic assignment. So that's why I start with that first assignment, where everyone just shows me what they have, and it gives me an idea of where they're at in this learning process. I'm checking out my notes right now. The big struggle I see across all of my students is that they want to be effective instructors, but they haven't necessarily learned how to write for students. Even people who have been teaching for years were never taught the genre of how to particularly write instructional materials for students. So we work on that in this class, and the week 2 discussion board activity is a really concrete example of thinking about writing for your learners, thinking about understanding their gaps in relation to discussion board, and then learning to write language that addresses those gaps for them. And one of the ideas that I mentioned in several of your documents is that discussion boards are a particular genre with particular conventions. And students don't really ever learn how to operate in that genre with those conventions, or they bring with them experience from other classes and other conventions, and they'll actually transfer that experience into your class. So be very specific when you're creating discussion boards to indicate what you want students to do, how you want students to do it, what discussion board posts should look like, writing up or giving good examples. Sometimes I'll pull a really great discussion board post into the next week's weekly announcement and say, hey, go back and look at Jennifer's post. That was really great. That's an example of what I want you to do in the discussion boards. So teach the genre conventions along with the assignment itself. Don't assume that students understand language or jargon. So don't assume if you tell students to write clear, concise posts that they will understand clarity or conciseness. Clarity or conciseness. Make sure if you say do a particular step that you give language to help students know how to do that step. And I think that's what was happening in that week 2 discussion board, now that I think about it. I think I wasn't quite separating the steps out enough, that you should think about a discussion board post. You could maybe even draft one out and then talk about how students might struggle with that. And I think because I didn't quite enunciate all of those steps clearly, it caused some problems with some of my writers. So I want to talk a little bit about this activity and then let you go to revise. So think about your learners, what they want, why they're in your class, whatever your class is, what their motivations are. And then after you create that kind of learner profile, and it can be either you make literal learner profiles like Zach is 21 and coming back to school after dropping out, and he is motivated by getting a job in business. So you can either create some sample students from students you've known or students you think you might have, or you can just say my students are generally blank. Some of my students do this. If you don't know because you've never taught, think about people you know who are students and create learner profiles around those students. So once you've done that learner analysis, go back to your week 2, look at your discussion board grid where you created that learner-centered language, look at your revision from the 2.2 activity, and go into that first draft of your assignment that you submitted for the 1.3 OWI assignment, draft 1, and do these additional things in that assignment. So create language or activities that address issues of student motivation or attitudes about the assignment. Just be honest with them about, here's some things you might struggle with. Include materials for students to understand how to complete the assignment. So that could be links to readings, it could be completed project examples, it could be examples of good discussion board posts. Are there audio or video materials that you can include that help to enhance the students' understanding of the assignment? So put some materials for the students into the assignment itself that help them understand the assignment at the points where they need those things. Instructions about how to use learning environments. So how can students use the discussion board effectively? If they're going to be posting something in Blackboard, where do they need to go to post? And if you don't know how Blackboard works mechanically, or you're not sure what LMS you're going to use, just put an acknowledgement in, write instructions for posting to assignments feature here. So you have places that you can go back in later and put those descriptions in. I'd like you to think about, for the project description as a whole, using Hewitt's what, why, how, do steps to kind of frame the components that you're going to include in the project. So think about adding what you want them to do at the beginning. What is it that your assignment is asking them to do? Then why? Why are they doing this? Why is it important to them? Why does it relate to other parts of the class? Why do they need to develop these particular skills in writing? And maybe even here is where you could put your objectives in. This is why we're doing them, because it relates to these bigger objectives of what we want to do in the class. How are those instructions? So you've been working on revising those instructions. How do they do this assignment? Do they need to take notes? Do they need to view materials? Do they need to look at samples? Do they need to complete a discussion board? Just think about laying out the steps of how they can do that. And then at the bottom, have something about how they can submit it. How do they turn this in? When do they turn this in? And you might reiterate that at the top and the bottom of the page as well. So Chapter 13, providing readable instructional feedback online, is linked in here because Hewitt explains what, why, how, do in relation to feedback. But I'd like you to think about what, why, how, do in relation to assignment creation as well. Add in a discussion board activity just somewhere in the project. So go back to the types of prompts on page 52 of Writing Together and choose one of them to incorporate into your assignment. At this point, you're going to start thinking about the assignment not just as an assignment sheet, but as an assignment sequence. So maybe the discussion board's used for brainstorming or peer review or discussing a reading or helping them come up with a topic. Whatever it's going to be in relationship to this activity, add that in. And use that language, the student-centered language or student-facing language from your week two activity. And then at the end of the assignment, add in a metacognitive activity. This might drive Ben crazy, a metacognitive activity to help students develop habits of mind about their own learning. So at the end of the assignment, create a reflective piece. Ask them to reflect on something about the assignment to make them rethink their process or something that they learned or something that they need to work on. And that can be kind of anything at this point that you want it to, but just think about putting that metacognitive aspect in there. And then there's a bonus. You can try to work a reading to learn strategy into your assignment. And I've linked the Part 2 Reading to Learn overview into this part. If you know that you're going to have reading as a key component to your class, you might just look at putting in a schematic activity or something that helps them actually tackle the readings that they're going to have to do for this class. I wanted to reiterate that we're starting to move away from just thinking about this as an assignment sheet, although will culminate in an assignment, into thinking about this as a unit, about putting pieces in that help students practice the skills that they'll need to demonstrate in the assignment itself. So in what ways will students be able to practice before they're assessed on these outcomes, before this assignment is assessed? How can you build in scaffolding to help students develop those key skills, understand genre, and learn how to write effectively in your course? So I think that's all. These are the assignment submission description. This time, instead of posting it in the shared Google folder, I'd like you to post it to the Week 4 discussion board, because we are going to use discussion board for peer review in Week 4. And I have some very specific criteria to teach the genre of peer review as it relates to our class. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I am really looking forward to seeing how you revise your assignments, and I will talk to you more in Week 4. Thanks.